history of medieval women for the first time, A Medieval Woman's Companion balances standard histories of the past to include virtuous virgins, marvelous maidens, and daring dames of the Middle Ages. Woolf asserted that a woman needs a room of her own in order to write. Some of the women you will encounter in this book did have rooms of their own, including secluded cells for religious contemplation, as in the case of Teresa de Cartagena, a deaf nun who welcomed her solitary life as a stable refuge where she could be self-sufficient. Others created lives of daring, wit, and courage in the face of oppression, danger, and challenge. These women are now considered vital for understanding the Middle Ages in a full and nuanced way. What are the Middle Ages? What do you think of when you hear the words Middle Ages or medieval? Perhaps princesses in towers, dragons, dwarves and ogres, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, Vikings with horned helmets, or the video games World of Warcraft and Skyrim. Chivalry and the cult of knighthood attract the popular imagination, though the flip side of heroic and noble derring-dos includes the slaughter of Jews and Muslims by Christian crusaders. Writers inspired by medieval literature include Sir Walter Scott, whose 19th-century novel Ivanhoe pictures honest Anglo-Saxons oppressed by rich and snooty Normans, Mark Twain, whose hero in A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court introduces mechanical innovations to the Arthurian Round Table, and J.R.R. Tolkien, the great Anglo-Saxon scholar, whose Lord of the Rings series brilliantly reimagines Old English, Old Norse, and Germanic mythology and literature. What are the Middle Ages? When were they? And where did they occur? People in 1200 did not walk around saying, "I'm in the Middle Ages." It was the present to them, just as 2016 or 2025, depending on when you're reading this, is now to you. Perhaps it was a woman who founded the Middle Ages, as was suggested in 395 by Ambrose, the Archbishop of Milan. He credited Helena, mother of the Emperor Constantine, at her funeral with finding the cross and nails with which Christ was crucified, suggesting that this discovery ushered in the Christian Empire. When do the Middle Ages end? When does any age end? Think of the 1960s. When most people imagine the 1960s, they may think of hippies, peace signs, rock and roll, the Beatles, Vietnam, protests, the civil rights movement, and miniskirts. Do all those go away once the clock told us it was the 1970s? Did they end on January 1st, 1970? No, and so it is with any era designated by historians as a distinct period. Different ages have understood the Middle Ages in varying ways. In the 16th century, religious tumult accompanied a rejection of the past, including the wholesale destruction of irreplaceable manuscripts, artworks, and architectural masterpieces by King Henry VIII's thugs. The 18th century English historian Edward Gibbon dismissed the Middle Ages as a barbaric and superstitious backwater. Some late 18th and early 19th century writers romanticized the period as a rural idyll. And Victorian pre-Raphaelites re-envisioned medieval aesthetic, with their own architecture, art and literature, that extolled tragic honor and lofty ideals. The Middle Ages in this book refer to the years 500 to 1500 CE, in Western Europe, its civilization and culture. While the focus is on Christian Western Europe, other faiths that existed within its borders will be referenced. When writing about a particular time period, it is difficult and unwise to make generalizations. But there were certain continuities in Western Europe between the acceptance of Christianity by the Roman Empire in the 4th century and the start of the Protestant Reformation. The timing and naming the Middle Ages is a useful designation in many ways. It can help us focus on an historical period that has recurring elements in Western Europe. These include the spread of Christianity and general suppression of other religions, such as Judaism, Islam, paganism, and heretics. But many exceptions exist. While most Western Europeans would be categorized as Christians, or heretical Christians in some cases, there were substantial populations of Jews and Muslims within these geographical boundaries. The Iberian Peninsula of Spain and Portugal provides a particularly lively example of three major monotheistic religions occupying one region. This is not to say it was always peaceful, but there were